Resuming debate, the honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South. Always a pleasure to serve with him in this place. And Madam Speaker, a Liberal walks into a bar and says, "Drinks are on me. Who's paying?" And who's paying, Madam Speaker, are the Canadian people right now with higher taxes, fewer jobs, and the struggling economy. We just have to look at the facts to see what's happened over the last 9 years. We have the GDP per person for Canada. The U.S. average worker is now making $22,000 more than the average Canadian worker. That's after 9 years. We look at a struggling economy with our unemployment. The unemployment rate for the U.S. is about almost 1.5% lower than Canada. They have the actual problem where they have 7 million jobs they can't fill. And in Canada, 2 years ago, we had 1 million jobs, high-skilled paying jobs we couldn't fill, and that number is now plummeting. It's less than 400,000 right now. We look at the average debt, personal household debt per person. In Canada, it's 180%, where in the U.S., it's just under 100%. We have Canadians that 9 years ago felt at that time that they could pay their mortgages, they could pay their rent, they could afford groceries. So of course Canadians and Canada, we were really focused on the environment. And when this government came in 9 years ago, it promised that it would be able to better the middle class, better the environment for Canadians. And what we've seen after 9 years of this mismanagement of climate and the environment and a bad environmental plan is that Canadians have found out now that it has cost them. And that's the thing we hear, Madam Speaker, when we hear about an environmental plan. The Prime Minister said himself that they're going to reward those that do the right thing, they're going to punish those that don't do the right thing. But Madam Speaker, Canadians, all Canadians, want to do the right thing for their families. They want to be able to get a job. They want to be able to get to work. They want to be able to ensure that their family can go to school and get a good education. They want to ensure they grow up and be able to afford a home in a safe neighborhood, free from crime, free from corruption. And what they're finding now, as all those things have disappeared, and this government still decries climate, environment over everything else. And what that means is that we only have a carbon tax that punishes its citizens, but punishes its workforce. Yesterday, Madam Speaker, we had an announcement to reduce emissions by 30% in the oil and gas sector, a sector that's already seen disparity at a time when Canada is going the wrong way. And if we want to see things go the right way, we're not taking out the environment in question, we're changing the way we do it. We ensure that we have good companies in Canada that are doing great things, but they're growing. You know, Madam Speaker, when you go into a hot tub, and this government's environmental policies are like saying you're going to a hot tub, but you're not going to pee in the hot tub, but everyone else is, right? You might think that you're doing a great thing, but you don't exactly have crystal clear water. And that's what's happening across the world. We have implemented punishing regulations to all of our sectors across Canada. We have a carbon tax that's punishing our citizens. But if we look towards the south of us, the Americans are not doing that to their citizens. They're not punishing their workforce. The Americans have an economy that's performing 5 times as well as Canada's. When they had an IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, it was supposed to entice clean competition and investment into America. And we've seen what's happened. They get the supply chains. They're getting the results of that. They have clean companies who are deciding to put their production in Canada. And when we thought we were doing only a smidgen of that by putting electric car battery manufacturing or assembly stations in Canada, we weren't including our supply chains with that. We weren't including the vehicle production. And even when we thought that the only thing we were getting out of it was workers, what ended up happening at the end was the workers weren't even Canadian. In Stellantis and Windsor, out of 2,500 jobs, 1,600 were coming from South Korea. So, Madam Speaker, we weren't doing the right thing to help Canada and to ensure we're working in a worldwide phenomenon to help the world when it comes to climate and it comes to environmental policies. And that's exactly what we're seeing. In Why Nations Fail, a favorite book that the finance minister said was her favorite book, it talks about how countries prosper and others fail. Those countries that focus on ensuring their members have savings, can innovate, and can invest, at the same time ensuring that they were free to, in a capitalist society, develop their businesses, innovate and invest their IP, and were able to find ways to expand their businesses and provide good-paying jobs, are those nations that were wealthy and well off with good democratic systems. Those nations that restricted and coerced their industries and set targets or decided what industries those nations should be in, and I'm thinking of the old Soviet Empire, those nations failed miserably, with their citizens finding it hard to pay for rent, to afford and have good-paying jobs, and to ensure that they had good wealth that they transferred not only to their own generation, but to the next generation. And Madam Speaker, that's exactly what we're seeing now. When this finance minister says that she admired this book, I think she forgot to read it, or she needs to go back and read it again. But because when it comes to this carbon tax, the fact that it punishes our citizens and more importantly our workforce, when it comes to looking at putting emissions targets and reductions on already what we find is the cleanest energy in the world. And when people are going to go away from that energy, they're going to go to the dirty energy, to the energy that's not only from dictators, but from nations who don't have any environmental standards. We take 15 years right now to develop mines in Canada, mines for those critical minerals we need for the future of batteries, no matter where it is. And yet other nations are doing it for less. 86% of all the mined material needed for batteries across the world are in China. And let's not even start talking about the failed trade policies, Madam Speaker. And we have an important election today. You said today the news is going to be dominated so much by the election down south. You know, Politico said today that this is the day that they're going to release all the bad news because there's going to be no more room for other bad news. But there's so much bad news, Madam Speaker, when we look at what's happening across the world and what Canada could benefit, or what its workers and its citizens could benefit from. We are at third base, Madam Speaker, and we act like we hit a triple. We've got the oil and gas that the world needs. We've got critical minerals that the world needs. We've got great farms and food production, and yet we punish our farmers. We've got IP, great institutions and universities that create great ideas, and if we just learned how to commercialize those ideas, we could get those ideas out and become a leader in the world in terms of technology. And Madam Speaker, we have some of the greatest people in the world who come up with the greatest ideas, so entrepreneurs and small businesses who just need a leg up to be able to grow and to be able to create jobs. 98% of small businesses create jobs in this country, and we need to do more for that. Madam Speaker, nations fail because they don't invest in their citizens, and they punish them for decisions that they are unable to make alternatives to. If Canadians had the decision or ability to create a different fuel source for their car, they would make it. If Canadians had the ability to go to a different place of work, they would make that paid them a higher wage, but right now they're struggling to keep the job they had. And if Canadians could figure out a way to afford their mortgage and rent and to make sure it was cheaper, they'd want to do that. But Madam Speaker, because of this housing crisis in Canada, they can't. And it's all because of this government and its government knows best approach that says that we know better than the Canadian people, that we can control the environment, that we can control this economy. And the result we know is an economy that's running away way faster from the Americans and other countries than any other nation on earth. We have trade deals that are not helping Canadians and putting Canadians first. We have workers who are struggling to find a decent wage and to keep that decent wage. So when Liberals may be saying, drinks are on me, Madam Speaker, the reality is our Canadians are left footing the bill. And it's time for a real plan, one that empowers Canadians, that brings jobs home, and positions Canada as a leader in both economic prosperity and environmental stewardship. We need a government, Madam Speaker, that is going to axe the tax, fix the budget, build the homes, and stop the crime. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's truly amazing to the degree in which members will actually mislead. The member said that we have a failed trade policy. Reflect on that statement, and that's what he tells his constituents. No government in the history of our confederation has signed off on more trade agreements than this government.
Right on.
In the first 3 quarters of 2023, we have had the highest foreign investment in the world, Madam Speaker, in terms of real dollars, third best.
Remind the honourable member for Regina Louvain that if he wishes to participate in the debate, then he waits for the appropriate time as opposed to heckling. And I also remind members, if they continue to heckle after I've told them to not do that, they will not be recognized should they rise for questions and comments. The honourable member, the honourable parliamentary secretary, if he could wrap it up, 16 seconds.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the GDP for Canada is absolutely incredible. 3rd in the world, 1st in the G7, and the Conservatives have no problem in terms of spreading misinformation. That is something that comes out of the leader of the Conservative Party's office. Why do you want to consistently mislead Canadians?
Secretary knows that he's to address questions and comments through the chair and not directly to members. The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Well, Madam Speaker, the member didn't mention Stephen Harper, so I'll do it for him. Stephen Harper signed the CETA agreement. Stephen Harper was the one who signed TPP and set that up for the Liberals to tee off. When we talk about who led trade development, what industries led it, it was oil and gas. Oil and gas, which this government has declared war on, led trade export growth for Canada. And if we want to look at what happened for Kuzma the last round, well, guess what? When you talk about your success, it was complete incompetence. 3 months before Kuzma was signed, Canada was kicked out of those agreements. And you know who went back in the negotiations? Mexico. Guess who is now the USA's #1 trading partner? Mexico. China's #2, Canada's #3. That's the record of this government. Failed trade policies. We're going to fix that.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Caribou Prince George. Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Same hairdo. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I want to recognize the career of retired MLA Todd Stone. He served the Kamloops area diligently for 12 years, and I thank him for his service as a former minister and as somebody who gave a lot to the area. With that being said, I want to thank my colleague for his speech. And my colleague from Winnipeg is talking about hypocrisy. Well, let's talk about Liberal hypocrisy here. Let's talk about a Prime Minister who's been found guilty of 2 ethics violations, who promised a government open by default, who fired the first Indigenous Attorney General and tried to get her to break the law. I think we should be taking no lessons from the Liberals when it comes to the sanctimony. And what does he think about that hypocrisy?
Member for Bay of Quinte.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. We're actually in this House, and we're doing a concurrence debate and reports, but the House is actually paralyzed because of this government. So this government's refusal to hand over unredacted documents to the police because Parliament said so is the whole essence of what this government stands for. It's not for the people. This place, we are put here and elected for the people, and this place has the power of the people. And if this government refuses to hand these documents over, the precedent that we set is that the people of Canada have no more power. This government would love to have that.
Questions and comments. Je m'excuse, j'avais manqué.
I'm sorry, I missed the honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith on the previous question, so I will recognize the honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you to the member for bringing forward this really important debate. Madam Speaker, this is my first time having a chance to review this very important document, and we can see here it has a list of lessons, and it says Canada's economy is still dependent on emission-intensive sectors, which is something that the member is talking about. But the consideration for parliamentarians, it goes on to say, how much financial support does Canada provide to oil and gas, and could the support be reallocated to workers? I think this is an important consideration for us, because what we've seen is the Conservatives continuing to prop up oil and gas CEOs instead of looking at a true transition for workers to a clean economy and for those jobs. And so can the member share why the Conservatives are doing all that they can to ensure that workers are disadvantaged as we move forward with a clean economy?
A brief answer from the honourable member of Bay of Quinte.
Madam Speaker, we're doing the opposite. Oil and gas in Canada employs 500,000 people with good wages and good jobs in Canada. We want to see a diversified economy, which means we have IP commercialization and tangible economy, that we're ensuring we're growing good small businesses, our farming. But until we do that, we have to make sure that the businesses and industries that are here in Canada are getting the support they need to keep bringing in the revenue that this government wants us to pay for all the other programs. We're going to continue to support workers, Madam Speaker.